I have been looking forward all weekend to this next very timely session. Narratives of Power, Songs of Resistance. Jovan Mays, Franklin Cruz, Serena Chopra, moderated by Aruni Kashyap.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. So much light. I feel like as if we are shooting something, like I'm a star. We're all stars. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming and taking part in this event and not spending your weekend watching football or doing something. You know, so thank you for your support. I'm here 3 poets, and they are fantastic. I just got to meet 2 of them, but I have been trying to find information about their work, and we just decided how this is going to be. And I'm going to tell you before I begin. I'm going to introduce them, and I'm going to say nice things about them, and I mean most of it, actually all of it. And then I'll ask questions about their work, and then we'll end with a short reading. Each poet will read something, and then I will open the house to question. And I always love the Q&A part of any event because I think that's the best way to generate conversation. And if you have more poetry requests, more reading requests, please feel free to ask during the Q&A. The Q&A doesn't always have to be, you know, this very smart intellectual conversation. It's your chance to know the writers. So I'm very proud to introduce Jovan Mays, Serena Chopra, and Franklin Cruz. Jovan Mays is the Emeritus Poet Laureate of Aurora, Colorado. He is a National Poetry Slam champion, curator of A Story, a student narrative project in Aurora Public Schools, a TED speaker, and a director of Your Writing Counts, a youth poetry program throughout the Denver metro that engages just over 200,000 students annually. Ken Arkind, a National Poetry Slam champion, says about Mays, there are very few poets that contain such honest passion, and this becomes immediately clear when listening to his lean, taut, and earnest prose. It is an extension of his character as a human being and an artist. His poems stop bar fights. Please give a big hand and welcome Jovan. We have next Serena Chopra. She has a PhD in creative writing from the University of Denver and an MFA from the University of Colorado Boulder. She is the author of 2 full-length books of poems. They're out for sale there. I would remind you to buy them before leaving. This Human, Coconut Press 2013, and Ick, Horseless Press 2017. She has also chapbooks, Penumbra, Flying Guillotine Press 2012, and Livid Season, Free Poetry, published in 2012. She was recently featured in Harper's Bazaar, India, and is currently completing a hybrid poetic memoir on queerness, trauma, and immigration. She is a 2016 to 2017 Fulbright Scholar, for which she is composing a text informed by her research with queer women in Bangalore, India. She's a multidisciplinary artist working as a professional dancer, theater, performance artist, and visual artist. If you're nice to her, she will probably dance a little bit also. Please give a big hand and welcome Serena.
Oh, that's so cool.
To my left, Franklin Cruz. He's a Latino queer poet living in Denver and studied at his Metropolitan State University, right? You're going to correct me if I get anything wrong, all right? Did you study also biology as your bio says? Okay. Franklin has performed throughout the country. He's an alumni of Minor Disturbance.
Time.
Okay, a youth poetry slam team that won the Brave New Voices competition, both adult slam teams, and Cafe Cultura, a grassroots indigenous spoken word artist collective. He has also taught and performed at universities across Colorado, including Colorado University, Boulder, UNC, CSU, DU, Colorado School of Mines, Colorado School of Mines, etc., etc. Please give him a warm hand and a big welcome. Okay, yeah, I'm really excited to be to introduce these 3 poets, and they all seem to know each other. So I'm that like odd one out, you know. And
we're all from Aurora.
Yeah, yeah, they're all from Aurora. Yeah, exactly. So actually, I think I should just leave the stage to all 3 of them. but I'll just do some minimal work as a moderator. Good for me, actually. I was really fascinated with the work you do, how engaged and socially engaged your poetry is, and the research you do, and the work you do in your actual professional life. And I wanted to ask you because. Frankly, your poems reflect the experience of being a first-generation child of immigrant parents and what it means to be queer and brown in our society. Serena, you're working with queer women, and it deals with trauma and immigration. And Jovan, you are a slam poet. Your work is political, and also you work with incarcerated men, right? And in prisons, and you teach them poetry and poetry writing. So I would really love it if each one of you talk briefly about your experience of writing poetry by drawing from all these different kinds of varied experience, and how you create a kind of socially engaged poetry.
Should we just do like this way?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds easy enough. Yeah. Okay. That's not part of the talk at all. That's just me and Jovan being weird.
It's all recorded.
Awesome. So for me, I write a lot of poetry. I think the basic for any author is off of identity, right? Because if you can begin with yourself first, and obviously then you can start traversing out into the external world because you understand the internal really well. The interesting thing, just because of the way society conditions us and all of that, queer people, the conditioning that we have inside, some of that stuff we have to unlearn first. Right, so there's a longer journey inside within, and then depending on who you are as a person, right, and all the different identities that you have, because we're not just one identity, we're 17,000 and then some, and so you have to spend a lot of time inside to make sure you unlearn the things that aren't serving you, right, so then you can step out and learn the things that will serve you, right, so.
Yeah, I'll go to Serena, but what are the things that you think we have to unlearn as we are growing up in this kind of a society?
Yeah, so there's, host of things you have to unlearn, right? Just because I point everything and pinpoint back to colonization. That point was just a really big shift for us in the way we think about a lot of things, right? So starting from there, just look at separate things. Speaking specifically about queerness, the idea of just a binary gender, idea of heteronormativity, me having to unlearn the fact that holding a guy's hand out in public is not a thing that should give me anxiety. It's actually a thing that should give me comfort. Right? And having to be okay, if people are watching you, it's not a thing that should make you anxious. That's them having to unlearn seeing a gay guy in public being happy.
Absolutely.
Right? That's just it. And then a whole bunch of other stuff.
Thank you. Serena, would you like to go?
Sure. I come to poetry, I think primarily because poetry itself is a queer form. It's often nonlinear, it's cyclical, it has dynamics of sound that are that ghost the meaning. So I think that to be a queer person, and by queerness I mean anything that's non-dominant cultured. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about immigrants, people of color, women, queers themselves, otherly abled individuals. Yeah. And so I think that what poetry really offers is a space for language and stories and imaginations that are non-dominant to find voice and to find translation of experience. Yeah.
I was really fascinated by your work with queer women in Bangalore, and would you like to talk about a little bit? How did you go there? Yeah. How did you end up finding out about them, and what did you do there? It sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk about. So I am a queer woman, and my father is from India. He immigrated here, and when I was coming out, there was a lot of tension, coming from a very traditional family. And I spent a lot of time yelling at him to get him to understand me. And I eventually took a step back and I said, well, I actually don't really understand where he's coming from. And so I applied to go to India to understand, one, more about where my father is coming from, and two, to understand how queer women in India navigate social and domestic and familial narratives, and how they start to build their own lives from a place in which there are no narratives for queerness. I mean, in most Indian languages, there's not even a word for homosexuality. So many of the women who I spoke to, when they were coming out, they had no language to even express that. So there's this huge gap, right? And so I wanted to just go and get an understanding of their narratives. How do they make things happen? So that I could bring that back and sort of integrate it into my own narrative. I also was very interested in trying to, how do you say, like, I went there with my wife, and when I would go up to them and I would say, like, this is my wife, Casey, it was just like like you could just see their faces just be like, this is a possibility. And so to also share that possibility with them was really amazing.
Yeah, wow, that must have been quite something. I want to come to Jovan with the same question, but I just wanted the audience to know, if anybody doesn't know, that on early September 2018, India made homosexuality legal. So, good news, you know, and it was so bizarre, and because it was against sex, against the order of nature, so anybody, even straight people having oral or anal sex, they could be in prison because of that law called Section 377. But it was a beautiful moment when the Supreme Court of India struck down the law after a long, long struggle, of course. And
speaking of colonization, that was a British
yes, absolutely.
Law, which Britain got rid of in the 1960s.
Now Singapore is trying to fight that law because they also have a Section 377, and most colonized countries, British colonized countries, has this law. Yeah, so that's, I wanted to just add a little bit of good news to your experience in India. Yeah, Jovan, would you like to respond to the question I asked in the beginning?
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure, you know, as I've kind of grown as an artist that finds my form to exist most commonly by standing in front of audiences, I tend to start re-steering my thinking around who are my poems designed for, and how can they be most effective, and who needs to hear them the most. So as much as, you know, black students, specifically black children, I believe need to hear more black artists, I believe that the issues that we're facing in our country of injustice aren't going to make that much difference if we don't have effective white allies who are willing to trade their freedoms in order to help the movement. And so I try to design my poems by giving the most authentic pictorials of the black narrative, honestly, with the design to deliver those to audiences that are not of our audience, knowing that when I am in front of black audiences, they'll find closure in that experience as well. As far as my experience of working with inmates, and you know, when you work with students in Aurora, I feel like you're doing a job that nobody gets to do, because your diversity of your classroom is so interesting. But I feel like specifically working with the men at the Sterling Correctional Facility, you find that police brutality isn't just about black people dying. When you put somebody in jail for the rest of their life before they're 21, that's a police brutality as well. That's a fatality. And if it took me a while, because you know, I think as artists all the time, it's like, oh, you feel you need to be compensated for your efforts, and you're trying to be conscious of that. But I think I had to have some real talks with myself and say, look, like, this is what I want to do with my volunteerism in my time, because I feel like these men are forgotten about by society, and when they do make a return to society, it will be even more clear how forgotten they were. So being in close contact to their voice, I will say that I don't feel like their poems necessarily fully influence my poems, but I do feel like I do know that I don't know how to be submittable for them. Their experience is their experience. And so
I'm really curious to know, how did you how and when did you decide to start teaching these men who are incarcerated in the prisons here?
In my last year as Poet Laureate, I was asked to judge a poetry slam at the prison, and the men just blew me away. They're very, 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 very talented, gifted, and insightful and deep. And I was asked. They said, we want you to come back. And I was like, yeah, I want to come back.
Yeah, I'm so glad you went back. Are we allowed to publish those poems, or you have to keep them within the prison system?
Well, as it is with everything when you operate with the Department of Justice, I thought education was bad with red tape. The DOJ is like 2 times worse. Even just trying to get the inmates' books is a real challenge. So the publicative aspect, you know, it's a tough bridge to walk, but it's not impossible, and I've seen a lot of successful efforts of operating with it. But again, agency becomes a really important thing. And how do you want people to read your book? And you know, do you want a forward for context, or do you want to write that forward for context? It's, you know, you have to, I feel like, be delicate to work with the men in order to kind of get this publication balanced in that way. But we work with them monthly. And so atypical to the prison experience, something that could take a really short amount of time takes an abnormally long time to complete. And that's just the reality of, seems like, everything. So.
Thank you. I wanted to go to a reading, but before that, I am also very curious to know about what exactly is the recent work each one of you are engaged in right now. I know that, Serena, you have published a collection last year, and you are also working on a manuscript, and Jovan also probably you're working on a manuscript. So could you please briefly talk about each of these collections or manuscripts so that you know, we get a sense of the new work that you're producing?
Cool. So I'm currently trying to write my first book. Like Jovan, I do a lot of things in front of a stage.
Yes.
Right.
Write that book.
Yeah. For the most part, like my pieces pretty much live inside my head, and then they're alive when I speak them. Right. So this will be the first time that they'll actually be in a collection. The interesting thing, I love biology. It's like the first art for me. Before I became an artist, I was a scientist, and it wasn't because I went and like studied books. It was because I was out in the middle of Texas, and you know, heteronormativity, being a queer-ass kid, I was like, no, I'm gonna go to the woods. Goodbye. Right? Yeah, like that was literally it. Like they were like, you guys want to go play paintball? No, I don't want someone actively trying to shoot me. What's wrong with you? So I would go hang out with the newts, and I'd go hang out with the turtles and all of that. And I learned a lot actually just being out there about like tranquility, about perspective, about time. And all of that. So this book, I'm titling The Biology of an Empath, and I'm really trying to take
Beautiful
this...
title.
Thank you. I'm trying to approach this idea of that bridge between science and art, because that's who makes me me. And I find that like science is so great about explaining the mechanics about something. Like literally, how does a cell do this? When does a cell do this? What happens when the cells do this, right? But the interpretation is so limited because it's so mechanical, right? They're just like, no, I don't need you to tell me why this mechanism is important. I just need you to tell me how the mechanism actually works. So that's when the art comes in, because art is all about interpretation. We don't care about definitions as an artist. You just take something and you're like, I know that's what it says, but I'm going to make it do this, right? And so then you like start to really understand the impact of science so much more when you stop taking a scientific lens on it and start approaching it as an artist after you've done the science, right? I remember being in school and like, you know, I'm losing my brain because I'm learning about all these like genetic development cycles and all of that, and like exactly when your arms start to develop and like how that's different from a newt and how that's different from a fish and all of that. But it's all controlled by the same genes, right? Literally, you have the same genes that all of these animals have. It's just different combinations of them turning on at different times makes your arm versus a bat wing versus a fish fin, right? And it's like the coolest thing to me in the world, being like there's like 20 genetic controls. And depending on that, you pretty much get a banana or you. Exactly, like that's the coolest thing ever, right? And like when you talk about science in this way, suddenly everyone is able to approach science a lot more, rather than when I talk about genetic controls and combinatorial control affecting the like phenotypic like presentation of an organism. That sounds so distant now. No one laughed at that. No one laughed at that, and that's the point of it. Like science is not meant to be this thing that's just like, ah, and like super terrifying, right? It's supposed to be the simplest thing in the world because you can see it. Like you can go outside and I can show you all of this.
I really hope you finish that book very soon and publish it as well. Good luck with that. Serena, if you want to talk about ink, you're most welcome, or in case you have just completed another book, you're also welcome to talk about that.
Yeah, I came with a different book. But IC is about university, like institutionalized diversity initiatives. Basically, the main character, Icarus, goes by IC, flies up to the sun, which is the university or an institution, and he's welcomed in, but in order to be there, he has to sort of whitewash, heteronormalize, and defeminize, and everything that's him melts off him and falls into the lakes below. And then there's questions about who gets to claim them, and I use maritime law of flotsam and jetsam. So flotsam is if you throw it all over on purpose, someone else can claim it, but if the boat breaks and it just spreads out, you actually get to keep it, and that's jetsam. So that's IC, and then currently I'm working on a book which I'll read from today. It's called Queerly as the Night, and it's about the shared darkness between different kinds of queers. So like my father as an immigrant and myself as a queer woman, and how we can, make huge gaps and, manifest all these like structures of difference. But when it comes down to it, I think society and people see us both as very dark, as misunderstood, as sort of just question marks, and it's a book that wants to commune those two spaces. It's also a book about trauma, the trauma of being sort of trying to bridge those places. So yeah.
And how far have you done? Are you done with this book?
It's being shopped at publishers right now. So
Wow,
get it out
that's
yet.
wonderful.
Thanks.
Okay, Jovan.
Yeah, I've been spending some time. I was really inspired by Tayembe Jess's Olio. And what I really liked about that book is I have never seen like a poetry book almost look like a small textbook, and I'm really deeply moved by history, but I'm kind of moved by like local and odd history, and so I've been spending a lot of time learning about the United States history with the circus elephant, and the just the very weird ways in which our country has chosen to publicize the assassinations of circus elephants, very similar to the public assassinations of African Americans. The embargo and attempt to move elephants across the ocean, and how that same thing reflects the Middle Passage in its own ways. And there's a long history of political cartoons and murders that have went untold, that nobody likes to talk about, that I find to be directly intersectional with the Black experience. And so I'm trying to work on marrying those through poetry, and I'll read some of those poems today as well.
That will be really wonderful. In fact, I would love to hear right now, because I think this is the right time to so maybe you could read for a little bit, and then each one of you could read something from your work. Cool. Yeah, Jovan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm pretty big on using music as a tool with poetry.
I think everybody will love it.
And so there's a band that I got to hear in some of my visits to New Orleans called the Eureka Brass Band. And it's just a lot of beautiful old men who are called upon to conduct New Orleans funeral marches. And the funeral march is preceded in two parts. One is called the spiritual, and the other one's called the dirge. And it's in opposite order. It's usually the dirge is played, the body's taken from the home and brought to the entombment, and then on the way back from the entombing, you're not supposed to mourn as much as celebrate. I had a dream one night of these same men morphing into elephants. And their trunks being trumpets, and instead of horse carriage caskets, elephant carriage caskets. And I thought about those cobblestone and brick streets of New Orleans, and if you had an elephant or an animal that large, what it would sound like, the ground being hit, and then how people would respond to that sound. And what if that sound meant that we lost a black boy too soon? This poem's called New Orleans Funeral March. I'm already dead. They say they carry their lost. A broken second line of dormant trumpets, baritone in their romp. The ancestors applaud from below. Another grandchild coming home. But the lost never feel heard. But the herd is always singing. Trayvon, Tamir, Michael, Oscar, trombone pickets, and clarinet signs. I want to say welcome home, but you ain't going nowhere. The ground clearly holds your progression. And somewhere in that abyss of poached, they will find black boy tusks and carcasses and see that all of our bones were the same. You know us black folks, don't you? We will be out there with the song, hopeful like bees, or should I say ants. We clearly march wingless, but that's where all that bass comes from. That's where all that resilience was born. That's how we line up. It's hard having compassion, but the tyranny of some will not steal the bellows' oxygen, and we will sing like flames, sending our prayers in ore to blacksmiths in hope for just a bit more armor. And if it don't come, well, we will beat the ground until the cicadas are fluent in locusts, until the trees look like a murmuration. They will remember you, son. They will. You will be inscribed in tectonics, etched in conga stretched monarch high, with elephant carriage caskets carrying you home. You see, years from now, they will find your weathered remains, this music beaten into your bones, trombone columns, clarinet limbs with a snare heart. No one will care about indictments. Only the sound the ground makes when something holy is stolen. Never late, always on time. Call in a half shake, response on a downbeat. Could you hear them stepping for you, son? The whole city stopped like they had seen the sky erupt in your name. Even the flowers came out to boogie, dressed in your Sunday best, reminding us that you never left, that they could take your body, but never your rhythm. Your song was our twist in the storm. We will not remember you as sunny side down, but forever sunny side up next to daybreak's fresh catch. Explosive laughter in all the wrong moments. Still tomorrow's hope latched to knees under mama's sundress, and we will call you is boy. Was never your name. Each step above you a key, striking the pipe organ in your stripped dust, so feel free to bop. Let your jives jitter the way they did when you came in. And all these heads sway, trunks wave like a vein uprooting the ground's hallelujah. Tubas bump, hips pop, smiles melt into your wave. Today you wrote the sheet music, and we had no other choice but to move.
Woof. Oh my God. All I have to say is thank you, and I'll hug you at the end. May I request Serena to read now?
Can we take a quick breath, though?
Yeah, that was like, oh my
God, I'm not ready to okay.
Parts here, the country. The brown part of me fears for my brown family. The white part of me hears my white family's fears and fears for my brown family. The white people of me have not met the brown people of me. The white people of me are so poor. The white people of me are so poor as brown people. The white people of me fear brown people like the brown people of me for whom I fear. The brown people of me fear not being enough. People of me fear not being enough as white people. The people of me have felt immigrant to the white part of me. The white people of me have for themselves whitened to the brown part of me. I have felt unbrown to the brown people of me. I have felt immigrant to the white people of me. In India, I am a white people. In America, I am a brown people. In India, I am immodest influencing of in America. I am exotic national security threat doddering in that expressing a relation to place the elements that part the country wherein secure those parts, the white parts part from the brown parts, where I am both parts, one animal insecure, where that immigration preposition is as the poor white of me, I am of rich brown of me, as the white parts and the brown parts cleave here, fearless increasing parts contrast of winter breasts to loud brown areolae, my purple lipping immigrant of hot seasons of immigrating preposition, always a possible daughter of, and where the white patch growing on my face is vitiligo, a brown person's disease. Threadbare curtain in the morning flags, the whole swelling pocket of being, the full terror of a new country, which is an old war. The air makes temporary home. Will you find me a place to weep with the sounds of life, nearly irrelevant, nearly kin? Who scolded us, said mint was a weed, told us to control our heavy lawn, heaving through the windows, shades rattle. I come into a pattern of swift light that immigration haunts me, how to language journey. When in breaking bread with the women I should be, I am naked and making between the nothing between me. I smell the sweat of this facade. The meats of our kitchen, palms full of mint, that we are full of immigrant. Our broken pregnancies are only bathwater. How we enter and exit wounds from one to the next. Have we come by way of theory or practice? I weed myself out, a strange overgrowth spreading between the fences and their homes. When indeed the wind compels us resurrection, when indeed bullets are and knives, when indeed the meat of a palm, the knuckle meat of a palm, is yours to caress. Take caress. That a man in a bar asks us lesbians to tell his friends that lesbians scissor. He laughs, I tell him off. He says he was just trying to be friendly. I tell him, tell me, does your lover pump you with anal beads? I left on saying, I am sleeping on a bus in my lover's curl. The man behind reaches around the seat and up my skirt. His friend says, yeah, he's an asshole. I tell them off. Everyone watches me. She pulls me back. He laughs. I'm laughing. She's laughing. We are holding hands. Romantic comedy. A man asks if he can hold hands with us too. A man runs through traffic, jumps in front of me. I scream. It's dark. He says, I saw you from across the street. I back away. He asks if I want a drink. I say, you shouldn't do that to someone. I mean to a woman. I am 5. The babysitter asks me to suck him off in the report. I call it, I bite the carrot between his legs. He laughs. His friend laughs. The concert has ended. A man asks us to make out for him. Me and my wife and a man stand around. If we ever need a penis, let him know. He laughs. We have some. Thank you. The doorman holds the door, asks us who wears the penis. We do. We kiss. He pulls over the cab, says we can't kiss here. I say things I regret. He should get out of America, go back to. I am so filled with being me. I exhaust toxic. 2 frat men come into our hotel room, pull us apart. Each of them takes one of us. I am a virgin. She pretends to pass out. Do I only want to write poems about being a lesbian? The man teacher asks. I am queer. I say if a baker won't bake me a love cake, that's discrimination. That's North Carolina. That's Colorado. Go back to Colorado. There's rage there, where I ask the photographer to stop taking pictures of us in our face on the dance floor, just us women kissing. He gets, the cop says I broke the camera, fabricates an evidence for nearly a year before he is caught and tried. Nearly a year. Everyone in court watches me kissing my girlfriend in the gay club. Straight man wanting with his pelvis says you're not really gay, right? With his dick. Say anything, crowding my space. The photographer and his buddy outside the courtroom say we're going to get those those dikes. We are sitting at a table. My girlfriend goes to the loo. A man approaches, takes her seat. I say, my girl is sitting there. He says he'll move when she returns. He sits in silence. She returns. I say she's back. He gets up, throws his drink in my face, throws my drink in my face. I throw a punch, am carried out, fired for kissing a girl outside of the restaurant where I work. My cousin calls me a nigger dyke. My father is shamed, will move out of state, says never come home. You are not who I thought. Someone says you are too pretty to be eating at a picnic bench. A man asks to sit between us is the fear of being seen with nothing to say. And nearly a year later, and the prosecutor tries to charge me with drunkenness, says clearly I was drunk because I was kissing a girl, approaches me, asks me to dance. Her man asks me to step outside, and it's the comfort of a distant hollering, hey, baby girl, yum, that keeps the animal without me.
Thank you, Serena. That was really amazing.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna stand up. Sound good?
Please, yes.
Yeah, I like standing up more. I like the interaction of an audience.
Do you need the mic? Yeah, you can take this.
I'll be fine.
I think we're recording.
Get the mic, Franklin.
Tell me what to do again, Jovan. We know each other. This is why I can be mean to him. The closer you are to me, the meaner I am to you. It's because you understand that I love you. So this is just called Before That. Whenever people ask me for my identity, I really wish I could just respond with this poem. I'm always trying to remember where I come from and who I am because I'm a pretty damn eccentric person. But before this, I'm just trying to be my most professional self and utilize this wealth of knowledge I've collected. But before this, I'm just a busybody, always playing rhythms with my feet so that everywhere I go is a dance, always singing a song so that my journey is a jam sesh. I am a soulful, big bone swing band. But before this, I'm just an hermano, preoccupied with my baby sister's laughter, making sure she's cackling Mexicana milagrosa, happy baby brown girl bubbly. But before this, I am a queer, built of the sear bones and epitomes of Spartans, who started wars only after they made love to each other. Because to them, a wife's kindness wasn't exactly battle-ready, but a comrade's devotion sure as hell was legendary. But before this, I'm just the kitchen table inside of everyone's hearts. How we nourish each other with the food from the oven, shoving all the Sunday fun day into our belly. I love peanut butter and jelly, because it's one of the closest memories I have of me and my nephew. And that sticky mash of summer cartoons. But even before this, I am Latino. Explico that I'm a chico niño, still too young to understand why I can't be loud in Spanish, why I'm best tolerated in English, before people like Trump try to tell me that I'm a criminal. With all the will to demoralize the fabric of American values, set back told we plagiarize our identity. But he has never read my ancestors' codices. This, y'all, is how poison seeds get planted in both kids and me and my parents and the elders. We a whole forest of robbed trees hacked and uprooted, but before this I'm saluted for a flexible tongue. Shundo when I talk bilingual, as if a single one language can explain why we still use race as a target. But let's go ahead and get far from this, to a time when we didn't have laws to obey that were meant to keep us enslaved. Sovereign of the laws of white men who never intend to get off the podium, as pandemonium makes us forget how far we've come. Because before this, I was the Raramuri races in my great-grandmother's maternal mountains. I was the Spanish maternal blood my great-grandfather released like the running of the bulls. But even before this, I was Cro-Magnon, standing up against the whole mammoth, with nothing but my spear, my kin, believing we would win. But even before this, I was Australopithecus. See how many of you can actually make sense of this. As a species, we stood up, lost our footing, always putting our feet in our mouths. Didn't we notice the sounds that we make? How racial slurs actually sound like a rattlesnake on the ground? Did you just ignore the caution to think before talking, to look before walking? And we forgot the caves we crawled in, because before this, we were human prey. So instead, we prayed. We who know how to make good with our magic. Tragic how we forgot the gods within, how to turn pain and lust into faith and trust. We who burned out the Palo Santo wood, because before this, we just withstood whatever this world will try to hurl at our face with this pace like it's trying to kill me and all of my siblings. But even before this, I know I was just God's tear sent down right here. This is the language of turmoil. We who turn the soil in our poems to plant the seeds to make the oxygen we breathe. So before this, I am a wind mystic. Before this, I'm not gonna give myself over to stories that ignore me. I have always been this big. I have always navigated myself. Typhoon, I have not and will not forget that I've always been a monolith. So before this, I just had to tell you that I know the risk and the stakes of losing this. So I cradle this. Because before this, I'm just trying to understand where I come from and who I am for myself.
I'm sure everyone is eager to ask questions and chat with the poets. You're most welcome. I'll ask questions because I have a lot of questions.
If you're wondering who wrote both of their poems, I wrote all of them. That's it.
Verbatim.
Dude, kill shot. That was great.
Both of y'all. Y'all are ridiculous.
Jovan, you spoke about how the incarceration of just people of color in general in America. And I'm really struggling with hearing a bunch of old white men right now saying that, well, Kavanaugh did that in high school, and that's just high school, and look what he grew up to be. And I think of all the beautiful black babies that we've put in prison at the age of 13 and 14 that never got a chance. Mm-hmm. And you're not saying, well, that was just kid behavior. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And I want to know what your thoughts are on that, because it's really breaking my heart. And sexual assault is never kid behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a drop in a very large ocean of a litany of crimes that are dealt with differently according to where you came from and who you are. And that's certainly not to conflate what should be very obvious in this situation. I mean, it's hard for me to not like hear that and just think about how much more difficult it is to even drive a car, or to walk around,
True,
or to talk to anyone outside of your race. And it's not, and mind you too, like a lot of the men who participate in my program are white men. And I don't know their offenses, so it would be unfair for me to narrow my identification. But yeah, the imbalance is very clear. I mean, it's not just like Kavanaugh's like trying to like become a manager at Safeway.
Right.
Like, like that would be a whole nother thing. Like instead,
so true.
This person is seeking an enormously powerful position in our country and not I guess paying such penance. But you're seeing the power of the Me Too movement work against this individual right now. And I think if this was just a couple years ago, I mean, he would have walked through this slum. Mm-hmm. So I do think that progress has happened there. Yeah.
Hello. This is awesome. I just walked in about 10 minutes ago, and I'm laughing and clapping, and I'm about to cry.
Cry, let it out. It's real.
Girl, look at her just out the steps getting it.
I didn't think I was going to do that.
Breathe. You're human.
Thank you for coming.
She got the coffee in one hand, the mic, and the tears, girl.
Girl, today is
you
a
need to
human
come to
day.
the barbecue right now.
Let's go.
Now, I just have a quick question for you guys. Something that is kind of encouraging to me, and I want to know your take on it. Are you seeing that through social media, are you starting to see more awareness for everything that you're talking about? Can you see, because I am, race, gender issues, everything that you guys are talking about. Are you able to see through, and I don't know how much you're on social media, but are you able to see evidence of a shift in thinking because of people, speaking out on social media about these issues? Because I am. I have a 13-year-old daughter who is, she and her whole, I'm sorry.
That's the question.
Yeah, that's it.
Anyway, that's the question. I'm sorry.
No, thank you for asking that question. I think it's an important one. And I think in the younger generation, yes, thank God. I think, I'm half white, and my white half of my family is super conservative, super poor. And they say really racist, homophobic, horrible things to me on my Facebook and to somebody who they love. So do I see a shift? Not in the places where it matters. I see white liberals coming out more and more. That's fun.
That's
Thank
true.
you. But we really need to get into the pockets where it counts. I mean, there are people who just aren't educated enough. And education, I believe, if you want to ask me, education is the primary place of political problems in this country. So we do not educate and do not give space for critical thinking. We're too concerned about standardized testing. And we're just making drones. And then they fall into this vein of thought or that vein of thought. And then there's no breaking either barrier.
Yep.
So.
Thank you.
Hi. My background is in science and religion. And in 1993, the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota declared war on whites for the specific reason that, as a grandmother said, if you keep praying with our tools, because there's only one soapstone mine in America, if you keep praying with our tools to the white people, what will the children of our children pray with? So my question, I'm terrified to ask it, but my question is, I see a lot of conscripting by whites of forms that don't belong to us. And they, Thich Nhat Hanh and others basically said, rather than go colonize the world's religions, why don't you go and heal your own?
Thank you.
So I would like to hear more from you about your work. And you get the drift.
Yeah. I'm all about this question all the time. There's an artist, if you are not familiar with her, Lila June. You must go check out her work. She is an ecological, ethno-anthropologist, right? She literally looks at how plants affected the development of societies in the early periods of civilization, right? And how those things had a direct influence on who we are as people towards our traditions, towards our ceremonies and all of those things, and why, it's really important to understand your own indigenousness. She has this amazing song talking about European indigenousness, because her call, and this is something that I start advocating now, is if you are seeking spiritual, enlightenment, you're seeking spiritual growth, and you identify as white, the first colonization that ever happened was in Europe, and it was against your own indigenous. All the witches that were burned are your indigenous that were killed. Why do you think that by the time they left Europe, they had the whole system down on how to colonize someone? Because they did it to themselves first. And the thing is your indigenousness is still out there, because all of our indigenousness survived colonization, because we were like, hell no, you ain't killing us, right? So your indigenousness did the same thing, and it's just hidden in your pockets, right? So going back, and the idea, we as Latin people don't like the word Latin because it breaks things down. I identify primarily as Mexican, which someone else will identify as Venezuelan. We have different practices within our own regions. Right? So being able to say, I'm not white, I'm actually Polish. And that's different from being Danish, because you have different practices, because you have different plants that grew in your place. Right? One of my favorite things, I don't even know how to correctly pronounce it. I think it's kulning, Kulning. It's this Swedish call to cows. Yeah, it's just a basic farming technique that comes from the Swedes. And it's just a song, and you sing it, and the cows come. It's one of the most gorgeous things I've ever heard. It is hauntingly beautiful, and I just listen to it sometimes because it's healing. And guess what? That's your indigenousness.
And I also want to speak to this idea of colonization in Europe first. That initial colonization was the colonization of the feminine and matrilineal colonies. So the first colonization was of women. There's a great book called The Chalice and the Blade, which... Yes, Chalice and the Blade.
Chalice. Yeah.
It's a beautiful history of the ways, and not beautiful. It's a really beautiful writing of these horrific histories of colonizations of women.
Yeah. There's another artist here in Denver. Her name is Utimia. She also defines indigenousness as any relationship with the land. So even if you go back and you're looking, you just can't find stuff. Just go in that direction, right, and start developing your own relationship to the land. My family's tribe is Raramuri. Hardly anyone in Mexico really knows the Raramuri. Hardly anyone outside of Mexico has even knows where they go, right? They're from the northern foothills of Chihuahua, right? That information is so lost to me, but in returning to that, returning in that direction, I found so many other things that are authentic to me because I'm just walking home.
Can I speak to one other aspect of this question? Because I think it's something that's really important, especially in Boulder. And that is, like this morning, I was in this group for pregnant women. I'm not pregnant, my best friend just had a baby. But the woman who was leading the session suddenly started leading this meditation in which she was telling the story of Kali and Durga and Shiva, and she had it completely wrong. And I corrected her, and she looked at me as if I was interrupting her. But what I'm getting at is that, especially in Boulder and similar places like this, where there's a lot of liberalism, there's a tendency to fetishize Eastern religions and Eastern cultures. I think that's something that's becoming more and more dangerous for me as someone who grew up Hindu. Especially since Hinduism has so many political problems in India. Hindu nationalism is very brutal. It's very problematic to Muslims.
Let's talk about it.
I just think that something to be aware of is when you come into another culture's religion and you want to start to identify with it. There's nothing wrong with that. But do your research, do your history, have it right. And if someone wants to, guide you through that lesson, listen to them.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for sharing. Just wanted to start with that. Franklin, this is like more of a question for you. You mentioned how being in nature made you establish a different relationship with time. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think I struggle with a lot, especially like as an Indian woman. Like our conceptions of time are so different than like the Western world where like people plan their week every day. But like I like eat the same food my like great grandmother did, and like how there's just like a completely different aspect on how like the Western world makes us try to conquer time. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to hear from you about like how like again like defining indigenous as having a relationship with land and like natural time. Yeah. I wanted to hear from you about how you fight against that weird competition that the Western world tries to like exert and create.
To premise the whole question, I no longer operate under a negative positive spectrum. I operate under natural law spectrum, right? And it's the idea of like the light and the dark. And it's just the idea that even the negative things are here to show you something, and something that's positive can actually hurt you, right? Like a lot of people are always like, oh, I don't want to be a lion is too brutal, right? They have to kill something. I'm not that type of person, right? I'd rather be something like a zebra, I'd rather outrun the lion. Ready? Listen for this. If there's an orphan zebra in a herd and it's left for more than 2 days, other zebra will kill it. They will smash its skull and kick it, because it is alerting every single predator to the fact that there's an orphan, and that is like a liability, right? They're protecting the herd by killing an infant. And this is a creature, it's not to eat it. The lion at least has the mercy to eat it, right? So to answer that question, I don't fight it. I don't fight this notion of time because of colonization, we cannot avoid that fact, right? The same way you cannot avoid that, like, yes, it is a baby and you don't want to kill it, but it's going to call all the hyenas and the lions around. Like, that's a truth, right? And so I learned how to cohabitate with it, right? I learned when I'm going to, like, listen to it. I learned, okay, yeah, like on a professional setting, I have my whole persona for that, and I will arrive to a meeting on time. It's at 9 o'clock in the morning. The hell you doing at 9 o'clock in the morning? I'd rather wake up in the 2 digits and start at midday, and let's do that, Because for me, if I got my best start of the day, the whole morning is just for me to arrive. To arrive and do all the things, all the self-care stuff that you want to do. Sleeping, reading a book, watching anime if that's you, like taking your dog to get groomed so you're no longer stressing about the fact that your dog has little pee hairs and you smell all the pee everywhere, right? Like these little things, being able to like have that time is important. The best way to do it, right, is to return to nature. Because how many of you have seen that or understand that time-space continuum idea in the fourth dimension? So time is actually based on gravity, right? Imagine a grid, like just a grid on the ground, right? And when you're walking, that grid is actually a blanket, and then now make the planet a marble, and you know how there's going to be like indentation in that blanket because the weight of the marble? time right there is going to go differently because it's being pushed down. So it's not going to go whoop, it's going to go whoop, and then the extra couple of seconds to go down, back up, and then go, right? Are you not a planet? Are you not made of the same things? Therefore, time works differently around you, especially based on the way that your mind is operating that day. When I'm anxious, time is going, 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 going. A second feels like a minute, and I can do so many things. When I'm relaxed and tired, right, and I'm resting and trying to recuperate, an hour feels like a minute. I'm like, oh, I don't want to leave yet. Like, I want to sleep more because I want more time, right? So to learning the same way that, like, salmon know how to go back home, the same way that, like, gazelle and wildebeest know when to move, you got to know when it's okay to, like, give time the time that it needs and when you could take your own time. The best phrase my mom ever gave, give time time.
I'm so glad you asked that question because I actually moved to the United States this year in 2018. Technically on 22nd December 2017. But I have lived here before when I went to graduate school, but then I was working in India, and I have lived all my life in India. And this whole system of conquering time and, you know, like working throughout the entire week, I don't come from such a structure. And I don't have concept of weekends, you know. Every evening for me and back home in my, you know, city is a relaxing time where people go visit each other. Yes. And, you know, and we just chat, you know, we just chat. And if you end up staying till dinner time, they ask you to have dinner. You don't write to each other 2 weeks before and say, let's meet. So, you know, when I came here, one of the biggest things that was bothering me was the loneliness and a lack of social comfort, you know, and then even to meet someone you had to plan. That was a very, very, I think this is the reason why a lot of immigrants end up becoming friends with immigrants, you know, and they understand each other, the sense of loneliness, the feeling of suffocation. So I'm glad you asked that question. Yeah.
Just to add on to that, like, there's that very stereotypical, like, phrase, some of us use some of those, but, like, you know, brown people time, right? Yeah. It is that concept. Yeah. We operate on a different timeline, right? Like, for a lot of U.S. people, like, to say you'll be right over is like 20 to 30 minutes. Mine's like an hour to 3 hours. I'll be right over in an hour to 3 hours.
I refuse to live a life dominated by a spreadsheet.
Thank you. Okay.
Quick question. The author you mentioned, Laila June, is she the Laila June Banerjee? There's so many. I just found there are hundreds and hundreds of them.
So if you look up Laila June musician, she's a musician. She's Lakota. She plays the guitar. If you look up the song 4 Million Women, that's the song talking about it. I think no. Is it 4 million?
Lyla?
No. Oh my God, I forgot. It's not 4 Million Women. It was during the Dakota Access Pipeline. She made this video. It went viral. It was talking about, like, indigenous warriors coming to stand up. I think it was called Rise Up. Laila June Rise Up. Laila June Rise. Somewhere along those lines, you'll find her.
How do you spell her name?
June. Yeah. Laila, Lyla, June, like the month. She comes here all the time, y'all. Like, catch her when she comes here. She's dope.
Are we ready for the next?
Sure.
I'm going to share something here, and then also like to get any of you would like to respond. I'm the parent of queer kids, and how do you balance that whole concept with your family and your chosen family?
Thank you for asking that. It took a lot of practice, honestly. Some years of therapy, a lot of fighting. And what I came to with myself is that I have a chosen family and I love them and they support me, but that nothing can replace my real family. And for me, I said this to myself. I said, I will work as hard as I can to make it okay with my parents. I want to work as hard so that if something happens to either of us, I won't regret the effort I put in. And if I put in all the effort I could put in, then I did what I could do. And you're only going one way. Like, I can't change my father. But I will say that I just got married to my wife 4 weeks ago.
Yay.
And thank you. And my father came and he gave a speech and he said things that I've never heard him say to me before. And I think it just took time for him to see that we really wanted to make it work, and that, you know, and that also, yeah, so I balance it because I have to, and how I don't know, it will just work. It's like learning to swim. Yeah.
We love our kids.
Yeah.
We communicate. Yeah. But there are a lot of things I don't always understand.
Yeah.
That's fair.
What's going on? Yeah, and the queer community, yeah, it is.
That's
And the
true.
queer community has a kind of subalternness to it, right? Like, and that's not always for you. Yeah. 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 That's amazing. And it's so great that you're saying this. It's actually really lovely to see an Indian mother trying, because it's really hard. I know that culturally there's not a lot of understanding. Yeah.
Also grappling with other family members.
Oh my God.
How they say
Yeah.
they are okay, but then their
Gossipy.
body language and
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
reactions are something different.
Take a deep breath and just give a lot of love.
You're doing the work. Even as a non-Indian, like.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jovan, Serena, Franklin, and Aruni for sharing with us, for making us laugh and cry, and it was just beautiful. Thank you so much.